Larissa joins me once again to continue our conversation about what types of messages might men and women receive that are similar and different that may contribute to the development of sexual shame that can really inhibit the quality of our relationships and the development of our sexual health. If you're like me, you know your mind can be your best or your worst friend. Our mind is an amazing tool that can do incredible things, but our mind can also create problems out of nowhere. Sometimes our mind keeps recommending the same solutions to problems even when they aren't working. I see this pattern play out as individuals try to overcome their anxiety, depression, or even struggles with pornography, using approaches that make sense but aren't very helpful. This podcast will show you how real researchers and clinicians are changing the way we approach mental health and reveal helpful research-supported principles designed to help real people with real problems. My name is Dr. Cameron Staley, and welcome to the Life After Series Radio. So I'm back again with Larissa. I really enjoyed our last conversation around sexual shame, and I made a claim that was just my opinion. It's not backed up by anything credible. And I kind of threw this out there. I'm like, I think women get more messages around sexuality that contribute to shame than men. And you're like, I don't think so. I think you're wrong. And it's like, I actually don't really know, but I thought it might be helpful for us to follow up with that and really think through what are the different messages men and women might get around sexuality that might contribute to shame.
I'm excited for this conversation just to kind of see where it goes. Cause I think when you said that, I was like, I don't know. I think I was coming from a place too where I was thinking about people in my life, maybe. And I think I've seen men in generally be more negatively impacted in their, integrating their sexuality into their life than women. But maybe that's because I don't know where you want to start here, but I'm like kind of already my wheels are turning about for men, I think men, it's culturally acceptable for them to be sexual.
Yeah.
So I can see where that could be a difference. Women are typically, as I was thinking about this, what's the message that women get that is shaming them about being sexual? And I was like, mostly women, if you're a sexy woman, you're probably a little bit naughty or bad too.
Oh.
Which I don't know. This is kind of, as I've been thinking about it, that could be shameful, but for me that was exciting and kind of fun. Yeah. That if I was sexy, that meant that I was like a little bit naughty.
Yeah.
So maybe it's my frame of reference that I'm just like, oh, well, all of those messages maybe that are shaming for a lot of women, they weren't shaming to me. I was excited.
And I think that's always so refreshing to hear, because I think you're right. I had that same connotation where, of course, men are sexual. That's okay. Yeah. But if women are, that might be kind of bad or kind of naughty. And like you're saying, well, it can feel good to be sexual and sexy. That can be an exciting, meaningful thing. And I think that was probably my first lens I thought about was for a lot of women, it's like, there's not permission to be sexy or sexual. And if we are, something must be wrong or that's bad. So I think that was my first reaction. I'm like, I don't even know if all women feel like that's an option to be sexy or to be sexual beings.
That's a really good point. I think sometimes I forget, which is ridiculous, in that I never was there, I guess. Like in that, I feel like I'm different than a lot of the women that I talk to, in that I always enjoyed my sexuality, even if I did wonder if I was it. So how do I frame this? How do I say this? I enjoyed my sexual feelings and the fact that I was a sexual being in my body. But some certain messages that I received made me wonder about it.
Oh.
And I would say mostly that was religiously,
Okay.
That from my religion, some of the messages I received about what your body should be experiencing as a teen. And I was experiencing things I was told I probably shouldn't be experiencing, you know, being aroused for seemingly no reason sometimes, or maybe thinking I purposely aroused myself or things like that. Like those were the messages that made me wonder about it, but I always enjoyed it in my body, if that makes sense.
Wow. Yeah. So I think
Um,
that is intriguing. Like you got those messages and stuff. Part of you is like, and this is okay, and I feel good about it at the same time.
yes, right. And so that was probably a big part of my like pushing back against your saying that. But now that
Oh,
we're like starting to talk about it, I'm like, well, culturally, I wonder, like, let's see what are messages that men receive, or even just like societally, that could be shaming.
hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. I think about probably the most common sexual concern I work with is around
Mhm.
pornography,
Right.
and kind of my thoughts on that have been is often it doesn't seem like men have healthy conversations around sexuality until they're engaging in a behavior others would say is out of bounds or deviant in some way or
Mm,
not acceptable. So the first time they're actually having sexual conversations, it's because they're doing something bad or
mm,
wrong. And it's like, oh, that shouldn't be your gateway to have education around sexuality, your body, your sexual behaviors. And so I see that shame, and I work with a lot of men, but I also work with women who struggle with pornography as well. And for
mm-hmm.
me, when I compare in my mind, like the shame, it feels like double for women around pornography. Because often there's this maybe narrative around pornography. This is what men struggle with. And this is very objectifying for women. And how could men do this? And it's like this evil, scary thing that men are doing. And then if a woman is struggling with pornography, it's like, I don't know how women would even know how to absorb those messages that are out there about this horrible, terrible thing that men do. And for a woman who's like, well, I'm kind of struggling with that too. It
Yeah.
feels like I don't even get to join this conversation, or even though these messages are harmful, they're not even about me. And so when I've worked with women or had women in my groups for pornography, sometimes it just feels like there's another layer of I'm a sexual being and struggling with something that men struggle with, but it's like it's not a gendered thing, but it seems like it's become a gendered thing. And in
Yeah.
my mind, it's not. This is more of an emotional thing. It's not just a men's issue. And so I think about that quite a bit because that's a really common sexual concern I come across.
That makes a lot of sense, especially in the framing of pornography and trying to overcome a pornography, you know, what you feel is a problem, you know, unwanted pornography use.
Mm.
And when you were talking about men and how men don't end up talking about sex until they have to, like until there's like something going wrong, maybe from their perspective, maybe that's the shameful thing is, well, men just have sex easy. It's no problem. Like you just
Oh,
are sexually functioning and that is what it is. And so you don't need much guidance. Like you figure it out. That's an interesting thought. Like that
wow.
women are maybe coached a lot around sexuality in being able to protect it and guard it and make sure that you're not taken advantage of and things like that. I'm thinking
Yeah.
where men aren't really given those tools and words as often because they're more often perpetrators, maybe. And so men end up not thinking they have anywhere to go when they have concerns with sexuality or questions, or even just wanting to learn how to integrate it in a healthy way.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you should just know that already because you're a man.
Wow. Yeah, I never thought about that. And I think about when I hear people have conversations about like orgasm, I
Mm,
don't hear very many men saying, yeah, I'm having a difficult time with orgasm. It's like an assumption that, hey, man, you're going to be okay with that. Don't worry about that.
yes.
But often for women, it's like, orgasm has been a struggle. It could be in a specific relationship or lifelong, or there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
pressure. But that
Mm-hmm.
seems like that's put more on women where this is going to be a challenge. There needs to be lots of coaching. But for men, you should be good to go.
Yeah. I definitely think that's true. And that puts us kind of in a place of another, maybe it's shameful too, that the only important purpose of sex is orgasm.
Yeah.
And so if women can't orgasm, haven't struggled to orgasm, aren't sure how to orgasm, that can be shameful in and of itself, because you're having a sexual experience for the first time or whenever, and you're not making that happen. So I can see how that would spiral women into a shame place also.
I think that's a big one. And I think that might be another myth where the goal of sexual intimacy is orgasm. It's like,
Right.
no, that's not really the goal. It's connection and pleasure and enjoying that. But then it's
Yeah.
like, well, if you can't orgasm, then, I mean, this is broken. You're not doing it correctly. And
Mm.
that responsibility kind of falls more on it seems like there's more responsibility for women. I don't know.
Oh, but as you're saying that, Cameron, I think so many men think it's their responsibility to make a woman orgasm.
Yeah.
And so women go into their sexual relationship believing that too. Like if
Oh,
their man is a good lover, he'll know how to make her orgasm. I think that
wow.
that's a message women receive, especially through like media portrayal.
Yeah.
Like that's how it seems, is like if you have a man who really loves you and you're having sex with him, you will orgasm. It's like,
Wow.
I mechanically, that doesn't seem to be the truth, a lot of times.
And I think that's going to set up an unhealthy expectation where I'm not responsible for my sexuality and my active participation. It's all on you. And yeah, that's going to lead to a lot of hurt feelings. And you're right, shame on the men's part as well, where it's like, well, what's wrong with me where I couldn't pleasure my partner? It's like, what? It isn't really how it works. But if
Yeah.
they haven't had conversations or education, it's just another opportunity to feel bad about yourself.
Yeah, both of those things really set you up.
Yeah.
If you believe, as a woman, you should be orgasming, and then as a man, you should be helping your woman to orgasm.
Yeah.
Like it should be, if you love them, that should all work out.
It should work.
And really, it's a little more, it takes a little more time and consideration and understanding of your body to get there. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing you brought up that I'm curious your thoughts on this is like you said, women get a lot more coaching and there's a lot more awareness around sexual assault and those conversations.
Hmm.
And I see when a lot of people, because sexual assault is unfortunately fairly common.
Right.
Like almost 1 in 3 women will experience some type of sexual abuse or sexual assault in their life.
Hmm.
And yet, historically, a lot of the messaging has been like women, what were you doing? You need to protect yourself. You need to be safe. And there
Yeah.
hasn't been much focus on, hey, men, you're often the perpetrators. Like, are you actually looking for consent and are you respectful and having conversations? And it seems like there's not a lot of accountability on men around sexual violence and a lot of education and pressure on women that you should be the ones preventing this. And that seems really out of balance.
Yes, I definitely think we're seeing a shift. And as you were saying that, I was going back to thinking when you were talking about pornography and how it kind of becomes this like gendered experience for people. That's kind of what's happening here, is we've allowed that aspect of talking about sexuality to be gendered, to be like, well, men are this way. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
So women, you have to learn how to respond to that and how to deal with that. But really, we need to bring it way back down. Okay, well, that's what we're seeing happening, is men acting in this way and women having to defend themselves this way, be this way. How about let's teach healthy sexuality for everyone, that everybody should respect their own sexuality and the sexuality of other people, and just shift that language so that it doesn't feel like that's the truth, because I don't think that is the truth. Like, we are all sexual, we all are emotional, and it becomes shaming for both men and women when you set up this narrative that men are out of control, they don't know how to control their sexuality, so now women, you have to know how to control it for them and set up the expectations and whatever. Because now, yeah, you're putting yourself in a situation where a man thinks he's allowed to act out of control or be out of control, and a woman thinks that it's her responsibility to fix that or to control that.
Yeah.
And really, we all should be responsible for our own sexuality and sharing that with other people responsibly.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Yes.
There is such an imbalance where often men feel more entitled to sexuality and women feel more responsible for themselves and
Yes.
others, where it's like that's not how it should be. That is not balanced at all.
Yeah. Is that cultural or is that religious? Because I I feel like I have a hard time untangling that.
Yeah, I often think about so much of this comes from privilege, and
Mhm.
often straight white men have the most privilege, and I'd maybe throw Christian in there as well, where I think people in that group, and that's me, straight white male Christian,
Right.
hasn't really had to spend a lot of time thinking about other people
Mm.
and maybe their boundaries and what they want or their needs and desires. Haven't really needed to, and society kind of sets us up that way where we kind of bail men out of these situations more often than they probably should, and then put more responsibility on others to kind of protect these men from really understanding their role in this. And I think for me, that was a lot of the Me Too movement, where it's like, whoa, like this has been happening for a long time, but there hasn't really been this balanced approach like you're advocating for. And I think
Mhm.
some of that comes from our society, where I think white men have been in charge and there hasn't been really somebody checking that power for a long time. And I think it's starting to shift, and there was a lot of pushback against that. It was kind of my sense of things.
That's a very I you know, this is a really good opportunity to consider all of this because as you were talking, my brain is just like connecting all the dots of our history and how that is. We've just kind of been set up, I guess, and not understanding from a really early time how to have healthy sexual relationships because that was just kind of what, the most privileged people took advantage of everyone else who wasn't as privileged as them.
Yeah.
And so kind of trying to unravel and like rewind and be like, this is a really unhealthy dynamic that we've been seeing
Yeah.
play out for centuries or,
For a long time. And I think often that patriarchal system is replicated in religious settings as well. And so
absolutely.
those messages kind of get perpetuated. And it's hard to
Hmm.
really see past that system when you've grown up in that and it's just so ingrained. But I'm
Yes.
seeing people raising more awareness, but I think it's challenging to change a system that's been around for so long.
Oh, right. We kind of touched on this last time. I think that's the shame has kind of been ingrained so far into us. We just kind of believe it's part of the deal, like part of this
Yeah.
sexuality, you know. Shame is just part of that. But if we can really take the time to understand why we've got that so ingrained. And that's what we have to do. We have to take the time and have the conversations and do the work personally. I think slowly, like you said, it does. It takes time, but little by little, we can start unraveling all of that. That
Yep.
is just kind of been a product of nobody wanted us to end up like this or be concerned about what that's done for us, but now that we know, I think that's obviously the best place to be.
I think so. So we're chipping away there. And
Yeah.
I think the other thing that thinking about the couples I've worked with,
Hmm.
another common pattern that I've seen is sometimes a couple will come in and there's imbalances in sexual desire or frequency. And I think about in our diagnostic manual that we use to diagnose mental health conditions, in
Hmm.
the previous edition, hyposexual arousal disorder was in there. So if you didn't have as much desire as your partner, that was considered a disorder. And so
Wow.
I would have couples come in, and often it was the male wanting more sex than the female partner. And it's like, well, she's got a disorder. Can you treat
Like that.
this? And often it's coming from these old messages where, men are kind of socialized that it's okay to be sexual, and women not so much. And sometimes that carries into relationships, and you can see these discrepancies where it's like, my partner's got this problem. Can you fix this? And for me, it's like, that isn't always how it is. Usually in every relationship, if you think about it, there's going to be an imbalance where somebody might be having higher desire than the other. And
Mm-hmm.
often we assume, well, the men's going to have higher desire than the female. And that's not always the case. And sometimes when those roles are flipped, we can see a lot of shame there, where it's like, wow, I'm the female, a lot more desire. What's wrong with me? And the male's like, well, I actually don't have as much. What's wrong with me? Because this should be my role. But
Yeah.
often those imbalances that go against these expectations can contribute to, like, I think we're doing this wrong, or I'm doing this wrong, when really we're variable in our sexual desire and kind of arousal levels.
Yeah. And I was thinking, what got us there? Like, what got us to the point where we believed that we should like be having the same amount of sex, or like be on the same page about like when sex is happening?
Yeah.
And I was thinking of, I saw on one of these Facebook groups I'm on, somebody published this like, or post this, it was like a pamphlet for women in the 60s or the 50s. It was a while ago, about how to be a good wife. And one of the things it said in there was, you will give your husband sex when he wants it. You will be ready and willing and pretty and good to go, right? Like, that's your responsibility, is to be there for him when he wants that. And how shameful for both, like both the husbands and wives in those situations, to feel like we've set up this dynamic where, well, if I'm going to be a good wife, I better oblige him. Like, it's not because I desire it or because I want to connect with him in that way. It's because I know he needs sex, and I'm going to provide that now as a wife. But as you were talking about, we've started talking about equality and how women need to, women and men should share their roles in the home and in life and in the workplace and all over. We've started, women are like, I'm not going to just give you sex whenever. Like, that's not how this works. Like, I should enjoy sex too. And so now we start seeing more of these. Well, husband wants sex, wife doesn't want sex. She's the problem. And we set that up with all these women saying, well, that's because you're supposed to just be giving it to him, even if you don't want to.
Yeah.
But thank goodness for the work of people like Emily Nagoski. Have you read Come As You Are?
I haven't, but every time someone brings this up, it's like, you got to read that book.
It is phenomenal. And just helping women to just reframe sexuality for yourself and where you're at. And that's why I love it. It's called Come As You Are, because it's like, wherever you're at in your experience of sexuality is exactly where you should be. And it's exactly how your body should be. And you can work together with your partner to be in a place that you both can enjoy it. Yeah. It shouldn't be that this is how this partner is, so now we have to match and be the same. It's that we're coming together to share our sexuality, kind of going back to that again. How do we stop these narratives of putting one person up or down? That's not true. Like, nobody's up or down. We're all sexual. We're all emotional.
And I'm glad that we have those works and resources available now, and they're almost like necessary textbooks, because those messages have been so long, where like it's a female duty to provide this to their partner. And that has just been a really old message. Right. And I think it carries over. And so we almost need this, like, we actually need to counter that with some quality education. And yeah, I'm so grateful that is shifting.
Yes. Yeah.
I had another thought on that and it slipped my mind. Oh, maybe it'll come back to me.
Yeah. I was thinking when you were talking about pornography and how for women it's like a double layered experience for them, because of course men are going to be into porn because they're into sex, but women, it's like, I'm not supposed to be like super into sex and I'm like really into this, and I'm not supposed to be. just personally remember some of those experiences myself of being like, whoa, I don't think I'm supposed to feel this way about what I'm seeing right now.
Mhm.
And how that's just, I guess, another cultural message to women of you shouldn't be sexual until you're in like it's appropriate for you to be a
Mm,
sexual. So like with a man. Whereas men, I guess, kind of are given permission to be sexual always,
mm.
Like women though, you gotta be careful that you aren't being too sexual until it's like the right time in the right place.
Wow, until you're like allowed or there's permission.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, yeah. I think that is tricky because I think men get that message, but maybe not to the same extent where it's like, hey, don't be sexual till you're married or in a committed relationship.
Yes, the religious aspect I think can add with men,
I think
definitely.
so. But you're
Um,
right, in general, probably not as much. Where men, it's like it's cool. With women though, you need to be more careful. You're right.
mhm.
I think that is a different message.
That's probably, I was just thinking back to when I was pushing back against you saying that, because as we've been talking, I'm like, women might actually have been shamed more for their sexuality. But I think it's put both genders in a shameful spot,
Yeah.
no matter what the narrative has been, it hasn't been one of goodness and
Right.
health. So, but like for men and religion, when all the other men in the world are being told it's fine that they're sexual whenever, as soon as you start feeling sexual, that's fine, be sexual.
Mm.
But if you believe in a God who cares about when you choose to be sexual, you better not be sexual until you're married.
Yeah.
And how tough for a lot of men, because they're having those same hormone dumps into their brain at the exact same ages as those other boys who are being told that it's fine to be sexual as soon
Yeah.
as you want to be.
Yeah. Really, it's an impossible expectation.
Yeah.
There's just not an on-off switch for that.
No.
And yeah, I was thinking about, my thought came back to me when you said
Hmm.
about these balances with kind of sexual desire in marriages, and how that doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about if you had an expectation that we would be hungry at the same time
Hmm.
and have the same appetites, or we would want to wake up in the morning at the same time or go to sleep at the same time and need the same amount of sleep. Like, these are some basic drives that we have with
Yeah.
sleeping and hunger and sexuality. They're not, there's just variability and they can change within us, but they're not going to always be equivalent to your partner, even though you really love and care about them.
Right.
There's going to be differences there. And I think we're not prepared for that. And then we quickly retreat to our corners and feel really bad that I might desire sex more than my partner, or I might desire it less. But it's like, it's probably going to be pretty natural. And that shouldn't be the thing we focus on as much.
Yes, I think in not talking a lot about sexuality and not like normalizing, because that's basically what it is. Like sleep differences, hunger differences, those are totally normalized from the
Yeah.
time you're little. Like
Yeah.
in your family, even like everybody is, gonna eat different amounts at dinner and everybody wants to go to sleep at different times and all of that. But sexuality, you don't really have a model for that to view. If some people probably do, because they have people who want that to be known. They want to help them with that education. But I think most people, that's absolutely how it is. You just have all this fantasy like expectation of what your sexuality should be and look like, especially when you're sharing it with someone. And yeah, all the fantasy kind of crumbles pretty fast if you're not orgasming and you're not wanting sex at the same time and you're not wanting the same amount of sex. It's just like, what the heck? We're in love. This is supposed to be easy.
Comes crashing down quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's challenging. I think often I'm working with folks when there are sexual concerns or struggles, it often does bring up religious messages and
Mm.
kind of those values. And I really appreciate the work of Elizabeth Smart around
Mm-hmm.
this area. And some of the things that she shared in her book and listening to her speak really stand out to me, because often what I've heard from women is there's more focus on this idea of virtue and
Mm-hmm.
not having sexual experiences as a way to preserve your virtue. And I think about growing up, I never heard any talks about that directed at me, about men's sexuality and their virtue. And I
Mm,
remember Elizabeth Smart talking about, like, that was one of the things that kind of kept her stuck in that kidnapping situation was,
right.
who's going to want me now? I'm this chewed up piece of gum. You can't come back from this. And
Mm.
that, I've never heard that message directed at men the same way that I hear women say how those messages have really impacted them.
That's interesting. I definitely, with women, yes, that's been something that is, I'm so grateful to Elizabeth Smart for bringing that stuff up. And I've heard more and more women share their experiences are so similar and hearing similar messages. But I'm wondering, like, in the LDS culture specifically, I feel like there is a lot of talk towards men and worthiness, not
Oh,
necessarily virtue, but like being worthy, especially of, like God's power, the priesthood, and that being tied very closely to how chaste you are, how, well you're able to manage your sexuality.
yeah, you read my mind. That's exactly where I was going to go next. Where that's often what I hear, and I hear a lot of men say, sometimes when I was chatting with church leaders, there was a lot of focus on sexuality and pornography and just feeling unworthy to
Yes.
kind of serve in my church or worship. And then I
Mhm.
hear women say, well, I never really got those questions from church leaders. They just kind of assumed that I
You're a
wouldn't,
woman.
yeah, you wouldn't be struggling with
Yes.
sexual things. And I'll
Hmm.
hear that. I'll hear church leaders say, talking about pornography and the men that are struggling. I'm like, but there's women that might be struggling too. And so to only call this a gendered issue, it doesn't help the men and it doesn't help the women. But you're
Hmm.
right. I think I do hear that a lot more. That this is worthiness. That's a different thing. So maybe women get the virtue message and men hear the worthiness message. And in the end, it's both maybe not too helpful.
Oh, absolutely not helpful. And I was just thinking, for all the men that I know that have struggled with that, and all the women I know who, have been in a place where, they don't feel like they're virtuous anymore, or men who don't feel like they're worthy anymore, it pushes them farther from connection from
Mm.
people. They don't think, well, if I'm not worthy of this, I'm definitely not worthy of a wife, or like as a woman, if I'm not virtuous, I'm not worthy, like a husband isn't going to want me, you know? That's I as we were talking, and I've mentioned this to you as just kind of my story. Me and my husband were kind of in that place when we started dating. We were like had our own stuff we were trying to figure out with the church and the narrative that we had got at church and our sexuality, and feeling really like strong in our sexuality and those being expressions of that, like for me masturbation, for him pornography, and talking about that together, our shame just like kind of vanished about it. Like we just
Wow.
both like we get like this is we have been in a place where I just felt like it put us on the same spot in the same spot,
Mm.
if you haven't experienced that place as a man or a woman, maybe like I feel like men more often are the ones that are put in a place of feeling unworthy, just because maybe they're the ones who have to talk about it more. I'm not sure. Or like you said, maybe because women don't really give themselves permission to be sexual, so they shut it down easier.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, that's a hard thing too. If you're going into a marriage and you believe you have to have this, I'm worthy of this marriage and I'm virtuous enough to be in this marriage, and you're not talking openly about things that you're maybe struggling with that you feel shame about beforehand because you worry that might, end this relationship that's important to you. Then you get into the marriage, and then how much more shaming to like try to talk about it and then be told, well, you're not worthy of this. You're not worthy of me, because that's what I as a woman was told basically. And if I would have believed that he wasn't worthy, and I felt like that was true, I'd be like, well, screw you.
Wow. So
That's
that
hard.
makes me think about how significant those conversations were for you and your partner.
Yeah.
Actually, talk about your sexual histories, your expectations, thoughts and feelings about it to really come to a place of understanding yourselves, but each other, and that acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. A lot of couples maybe don't have those conversations, and then they have them maybe after they make a pretty major commitment like
Yeah.
marriage. And then it's shocking where it's like, wait,
Mm-hmm.
you have a sexual history, that you've struggled with some things that maybe I haven't. And often you're like, well, yeah, you're unworthy or you're not virtuous. And it's like a deal breaker. And that can
Mm-hmm.
be devastating for probably definitely the person being rejected, but the person that feels like I've been deeply betrayed and deeply hurt.
Yes.
Just really not understanding because they've heard those messages of worthiness and
Mm-hmm.
virtue and betrayal of anybody struggling with anything sexual. And it's like, yeah, most of us have sexual histories. We're sexual beings prior to a
Yes.
committed relationship. That's going to be most of us.
Mm-hmm.
But often where it's like, no, we're not. I'm not going to investigate it. And if my partner has anything, then I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like there's no room to be human in this equation. And if
Right.
you are, your relationship might be over.
Mm-hmm.
And that pressure is it's just going to crack and lead to more kind of struggles. And often people soothe themselves through sexuality.
Right.
And that's going to be another bind where it's like, oh, I don't have access to those coping strategies or soothing myself because my partner has such a view that if there's anything sexual outside of this really narrow view, then it's over. And it's just, yeah, it makes it a really difficult place to start those conversations.
So high pressure. So high pressure. And that's where when I think back about me and my partner and how we came together, I'm just so grateful because I see so many couples. I don't think it feels right to anyone, right? Like when you get in this place where you've been told this narrative and how you should be and how you should feel, maybe all of that isn't as explicit, but it's kind of given to you through the narrative,
Yeah.
like, well, if your husband's not worthy of you, that could mean that your family's going to deteriorate and you're going to, he's going to go down a deeper, darker path and it's just going to get worse. Or if your wife was sexual before you were married and didn't talk to you about it, maybe she's going to be deviant still. Maybe she is deviant and I can't trust her. All that stuff is kind of just like expected. You don't really, that's just like you fall into that place because that's kind of what you've been told you need to do. And so for me and my partner, where we were like both like, oh my gosh, you get it. Like you get how I'm feeling. I get how you're feeling. It just totally erased all of that because we're like expecting that it's going to be this big thing to tell them. And then maybe the relationship is going to be over. And it's like, well, actually, I'm like dealing with my own stuff too. Like every human, like you said,
Yeah.
but we are not given that language as much. That's really that's where we need to be, is that we're all human and we're all going through our stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just, if we can give each other the connection and the empathy and the place to just hear the shame, just let it be known, how much quicker that just takes shame out.
And it feels so fortunate that you were able to relate to each other and have those conversations.
Yes.
And often, maybe the one thing that I see that gets in the way is maybe somebody was kind of struggling around sexual behaviors or identity. And maybe one partner wasn't struggling with sexuality. They used like food or gaming or
Yeah.
something else. It's a really similar
Shopping.
function. Yeah, shopping.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but it's like, oh, but yours is bad. Yours is worse. I mean, yours was sexuality. Mine was food or shopping. It's not sinful or it's not bad.
Yeah.
You need to take care of yours. And it's like, wow, actually, it's the same kind of function. Like we're still human. We still cope with the emotions. And yet we're not often keeping tabs on our partner's other coping strategies. But when it's in the sexual realm, it's like, well, that one we really got to pay attention to. And we
Yeah.
got to keep tabs on that one. And that can keep an imbalance. And often I think about, we need to find a way to how we relate. And
Yes.
sometimes it's not like, oh yeah, I maybe haven't struggled sexually in the same way you have, but I struggle in other ways.
Yeah.
And there's things I do to cope with the stress and emotions that it may not be the healthiest either. I get you. We're in the same place. We might call them different. This was a sexual one. This is a food one or a shopping one.
Mm-hmm.
But I think without being able to find that place of I relate to you as just a fellow human that we struggle, and sometimes we do healthy coping and sometimes we don't, then I think that imbalance shows up really quickly. So for you and your partner, it's like, oh, we kind of get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish we could all kind of get it, even when it's not as equivalent.
Right. And that I know that that's why because we were both in the realm of sexuality. And especially for people who are religious, I think sexuality touches a nerve because, well, sex is something I just share with my partner. Like, right? If this is just supposed to be something that I share with him and that he shares with me. And that's maybe another message we get is that, our sexuality is somehow part owned by our partner. But in reality, our sexuality is wholly ours. It's completely ours to experience, and we just get to share it. And how beautiful that somebody chooses to share their sexuality with us. But if we somehow feel like we're part owners in someone else's sexuality, then we take on that shame and say, how dare you make me feel this way?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that whole dynamic of relationally, how much meaning we put on sex, which I think rightfully so. It would be good if we use that meaning to say, well, this is how important it is, let's care about it more. Let's do the work we need to make it so that it is that, and not just, well, it just is what it is because we're married, so that's where I think I'm having a lot of thoughts happen at once, but I'm just thinking like a lot of the partnerships maybe that get themselves into a place where one partner is struggling in their sexuality, they go to share that with the person that they care about, this relationship. They want their sexual relationship with this person to be whole and healthy, and they can feel that it's not. And then to have that person say, you made this way, when really it probably wasn't healthy before, like how can we say, well, as somebody who wants to share that with you, I'm here for figuring this out with you.
Yeah.
I want that. I want it to be healed. Instead of you go figure that out, because I don't want anything to do with you until you do.
Yeah. I think what you shared is such a beautiful vision of how it could be. And I think something you said, it stuck with me where, we are sexual beings and we're sharing that with somebody we care about. And that really teleported me back to when I was married. And I remember my wife and I having chats where my body is now yours and your body is now mine. That was the mentality we entered that relationship. We're giving that to each other. And I'm like, that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But it's really owning that, and we're sharing that with each other. It's probably a lot healthier beginning and more realistic. But I remember having that backwards mentality a long time ago. I'm trying to think, 15 years ago now. And it's like, wow, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just not that helpful view. But how you shared it, we're sexual beings and sharing that. And if we're struggling, I want to share in that struggle too and be there for you. That is such a healthy starting point.
Oh, I definitely think so. And we talked a little bit about the orgasm situation for men and women and how that's tough for women when you believe you should be orgasming if you love your partner and you're in a sexual relationship that you're ready for and all of that. It can kind of, that dynamic of, well, my body is now for my partner, that totally hinders your ability to tune in with what you need in order to be able to have that happen. Where I think, I think for women, that component specifically of sex is so much more mental. So if you do have a lot of shame surrounding all of that, it's just going to add. And of course, your partner can't solve all of that layer that you've got going on for yourself. Even though they want to be there to support, their partner in that way, and they beat themselves up for not being able to make an orgasm happen. And in my own relationship, that was something I struggled with at first, because I was like, man, I knew how to do this for myself easy. Even when we were dating, sometimes it came easy when we were just kissing. It's crazy now that we're actually having sex and I cannot figure out how to make this work with him. And I just think there's a lot of that kind of around, well, I think because he's having sex with me, he should be making it happen now. I think that was part of what I was going through. I was thinking that kind of along the same lines you were, like, my body is his and his body is mine. And I'm obviously doing a good job because he's able to enjoy it, but I don't know what's going on my end. But really, when I just owned myself again, I was like, I can make this experience enjoyable for myself and share that with him. Man, rewrote the story for me, and it was all, it all started working better. And so I think, yeah, that's a big one.
That's amazing.
And not feeling like you can own your sexuality and feel good about that.
Yeah. I think that's so disempowering to say, yeah, it's not my responsibility anymore. I'm more of a passive participant.
Yes.
And that how you say it is like, it just connects with me. Like that is how it can be.
Mm-hmm.
Just owning that sexuality and sharing that. But honestly, Larissa, just listening to you talk, I'm just like, you can talk about these things so fluidly and comfortably and say, yeah, this is my experience. That is so refreshing because these are not conversations people typically have. And it's like, no, we don't talk about this. And we don't talk about learning curves and struggles and what I learned on my own and what I learned with my partner. And the way you talk about it, I'm like, we should be able to talk about it like Larissa. And we all probably got a lot of work to do.
Well, I hope, like, and I was just, as you were saying that, I was walking myself through how I got to this time where now this is how I can talk about it. I remember two of my best friends before I got married sat down with me, and they were so open about it with me. And I was so grateful to have people that wanted to just like talk with me openly and wanted me to have just such a good sexual experience when I got married, and giving me all the tips and all the things to know and all of that. And feeling like, whoa, this is a lot at that point, which was almost 6 years ago now. And as I got into my marriage, realizing how important it was that we were able, and now, like I've said, that very first conversation me and my husband had about some of our sexual shame, I just like realized, man, this is important. Like, we should be able to just talk about this like any other aspect of our life. And we haven't been able to. And so I would definitely say it's just something I've been passionate about and been practicing ever since that time where I just was like, this is important. And I want to be somebody who people can talk to and feel normal. Like, it's just normal to talk about this stuff that's hard and that's complicated and that's beautiful and that's wonderful. And yeah.
I think you said the key thing. It wasn't like, well, I've always been able to do this. It's easy. Yeah. It's like, no, you recognize this is important. Mm-hmm. And it took practice. And I'm sure some of these conversations were quite vulnerable and challenging. But you're like, but this matters though. We need to have these chats, and I want to be able to help other people. And so for you, this has been coming from a place of values, that you care about having healthy relationships and supporting other people. And that's what's helped you have these conversations and get to this place that took a lot of practice and a lot of work.
Yeah, exactly. I was not bred this way. I did not come from a place that made this easy. But I do. I just, and I believe that it's so attainable. Like I have seen how attainable it has been for me and for other people who have chosen to kind of step into a place where, no, this is normal and healthy and good that we talk about this, just as if it were any other aspect of our life that we're trying to figure out or trying to work on. Yeah. And it's so empowering for people to be able to do that. And so I think I just want that for everyone. And so awesome. Any little step I can take in that direction towards helping people achieve that, I'm doing it.
That's awesome. Well, maybe with that in mind, I kind of wanted to expand this conversation before we wrap this up.
Yeah.
So often when we talk about gender, we've talked a lot about men and women. Part of me struggles with that because I don't see gender as a binary thing. It's more on a continuum. True. And there's definitely people that are gender minorities or transgender, gender queer,
Mm-hmm.
or they don't fit those norms. I
Right.
think about genders often on a continuum. And then often we think about sexuality, and we often talk about it in these assumptions that, yeah, people are heterosexual and they fit these gender binaries. And we don't. There's just more human diversity. And I think back to my training, a lot of our conversations were for heterosexual, cisgendered men and women. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, that's really not how it really works in the real world. And so I'm thoughtful about that as we've talked about these gendered messages, and how even more challenging this is for someone to say, I actually didn't even fit with that assigned gender. And how did I navigate that within my faith community or in my family? Or as a male identified person, I wasn't attracted to women. I was attracted
Mm-hmm.
to my buddies. Like, how do I navigate that? So I think
Mm-hmm.
there's enough shame around people who their assigned gender fits their gender identity and they are heterosexual. But if you're a gender sexual minority, it's like, whoa, we don't even talk about other sex. How are we going to even talk about this in such a nuanced way? And often it's like, if you don't fit that kind of prototype or expectation, it's like, now where do you go for
Yeah.
sexual education or sexual expression, or to find partners or have these conversations where it's like, wait, I can't even do like the basics right. I didn't even get the gendered thing right or the sexual orientation thing right. So I think that's always in my mind as I talk about relationships and gender, is it's much broader than that. And often I spend a lot more time working with gender and sexual minorities because there hasn't always been a place that's inclusive to give good sexual education or to feel like you fit in a faith community or in your family. And that can be a really lonely place.
I'm so glad that you brought up that um, aspect, that perspective. It just brought me back to what you were saying earlier about privilege. Like,
Yeah.
I am privileged to be sitting in this spot of, a woman who identifies as cisgender, and I would say my sexuality is on a scale. I don't even know if I could say what
Yeah.
but in general, it's much easier for me to be in this place having this conversation. And I just think it's so wonderful that you said that. That's a whole nother level of shame, because our culture and our society has been totally that voice has been totally shut down.
Yeah.
And I'm just grateful that now there we're trying to be better. We're trying to open up that conversation in a place for all of our minority, everyone who needs
Yeah.
that space to be able to talk about these things also.
And I think after I said that, that's where my passion comes out. And I think we've made a lot of progress around sexual orientation. And yet I
Mm,
think about gender identity. I don't even know if we've started or got out of the gate. I feel like
yeah.
people that don't fit those two gendered categories,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's hard to find your place. And I feel like sexual orientation, we're doing a better job, but gender, for some reason, it's probably the first identity we socialize before we're even born. We're like,
Yeah.
what gender is it? And it's like, well, I don't know. Like, this little being isn't here yet. Like, we don't know. That's a pretty complex construct. But yeah, I think it just gets difficult to navigate, and to navigate those role expectations. It gets challenging quickly. And yeah, I think I would feel regretful if I didn't include that in this conversation. That the things we talked about are around kind of some stereotypes and general messages,
Yes.
and yet each one of us are going to interact with these messages differently based on our own identity and where we fall on gender and sexuality spectrums. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it gets complicated quickly. So to make assumptions that porn is a men's issue falls so flat on so many layers, that we
Yes.
have to be more aware of just gender sexual diversity to begin with, but then how complex human nature and mental health really is, that these require getting to know people and having relationships and humanizing one
Yes.
another, and
Yes.
taking the time to get to know each other, and coming from that place of care and empathy and desire to help. And I think that is going to help us move forward. In this old system is, well, if you don't look and act just like me, I am not interested. That just isn't going to work anymore.
Yep.
Fortunately, there's people with a lot more courage than me leading the charge saying, we need to talk about this. We need to broaden this conversation. And I feel like I do it in a very small, meek way, but I do want to join in that to say we need to open this up so there's more space for people to learn and have healthy relationships.
That's what I was gonna say. You did that. We're taking the time, and I know just you saying that, I'm like, I have a lot to learn, a lot to do in order to open up that space. But it brought me back to what we were saying earlier too. Like, it's so important that we just help people feel loved and human. Like, it doesn't matter what your experience is. It doesn't matter what you've gone through, who you are now. You are so important to me, and I want to be here for you. And I think that applies in so many different areas, but especially this one, because when we can actually honestly offer that to people, it won't matter what you look like or what you feel like or where you fall on all of that, because we're all just here. We're doing our best, and we kicked that idea to the curb that any of us look like, because that's just ridiculous. We all look super different, and we're all going to experience this life in a completely different way.
I love that. That is so well said. And often as I'm having these conversations, I'm coming from a psychologist lens and worldview and a very humanist heart.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, as I was wrapping this up, a religious belief showed up for me that I want to share. And it is my belief that the worth of souls is great. And I often in my mind, I say in the sight of God, but also I believe the worth of souls is great.
Yes.
And that applies to everybody, regardless of our gender, sexuality, body type, shape, preference, you name it. I believe we have worth.
Yes.
And I feel like a lot of people have not had that opportunity to have a voice or have a place at the table to have these conversations. So for me, that's coming from my humanist part, but also my religious part, where I feel like we all have worth, and we all deserve somebody taking the time to get to know us and to help us have these relationships that we really want.
I love that phrase is non-gendered. It's soul. Like, we all are souls, and every single one of our souls is great. And I love just the care really around that phrase. Like, if we believe that to be true, like, we won't allow any of these messages that we talked about this whole time together to matter anymore, because they don't matter. None of those messages matter. We hear them, we've heard them, but as far as our worth goes, as far as we go, doesn't matter. We are worthy, and we are great.
I love it. Well, this is fun, Larissa. I'm excited to keep having these chats and see where they go. And I've just really appreciated just how you're able to talk about these conversations. I think I'm really excited for people to hear how you talk about these things, to give like, this is possible. Like, we can have these chats. For me, I think that's my favorite part about talking with you.
Well, thanks for having me. Like I said, I'm just really grateful to be here and talking with you and considering all these ideas. And I hope that it does for someone, just make them feel like, man, this is all good. This is all worth it. I am just wonderful the way I am.
I love it. Okay, till next time.
All right, we'll see ya.
Hey, thanks for listening. Please remember to rate and subscribe. I know you might be facing some issues in your life or know someone who is. Issues like anxiety, challenges in dealing with emotions, or other compulsive behaviors like unwanted pornography. And I know it's tough to talk to people about problems. Difficult to stare those obstacles down that we face in life and to really know how to deal with them. It's hard to know what to say and when to say it. And then when that moment you finally reach out to family and friends happens, sometimes it falls flat. I haven't found many programs teaching effective strategies like mindfulness, how to improve relationships, and ways to address unwanted pornography viewing through research-supported principles. So whether you simply want to help with a problem like unwanted pornography, difficulty responding to emotions, or just want to understand the world of someone struggling with porn a little better, head over to LifeAfterPornography.com and get in on the next training. There you'll learn the exact same strategies individuals addicted to pornography used to transform their lives by implementing principles from evidence-based treatment shown effective in research for reducing unwanted pornography viewing. You'll learn the secrets, the myths, the enemies to recovery, and the LAP framework for dealing with unwanted porn viewing that we call WAVE. If that's something that interests you, click the link in the description, or just head over to LifeAfterPornography.com. I'm Dr. Cameron Staley. See you on the inside.